Hello, I'm Henry Deshane, and I'm here to talk to you about this idea that people seem to think that America is systematically racist. Uh, that's wrong. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to the facts point in all directions to the fact that there's differences between races, but to put that on the feet of all America and say, well, look at this racist country, is just wrong. This stems from a much larger problem in that we generally tend to think of people in opposition to us and just we think the worst of people. We don't give people the benefit of the doubt. We try to we try to guess at their motives and at different things. And really, this is the root of the problem: is that if you are to think that America is racist, you first have to think that everyone in America has the worst of intention for everything that they do. As we saw earlier in the Lincoln Memorial incident, that you just can't trust the media and large political figures to remain calm, to remain civilized, and to not put the blame on someone that doesn't deserve it because they thought the worst of the kids involved. As you saw, the kid got doxxed in the photo. For those of you that don't know, the kid wearing the MAG hat got doxxed. This is where his personal information was released. People knew where he went to school. People knew his name. People knew where he lived. People knew his family. And so, we see this, and his family got death threats. His school got threatened to be shot up. This was a terrible incident, and it should never have happened. The only reason that this happened is because this happened because they assumed the worst of him. So let's take the original narrative that was given to the media at the time. For those of us that remember, is that it was given over the weekend where this happened. Is that the Indian guru guy was trying to the white MAGA kids surrounded him and were sitting there saying racial slurs at him, shouting "Build the wall," and a lot of this stemmed, again, this was his sort of how it happened, which people don't like to acknowledge because, it means that he was deliberately lying. So, the Indian guru guy, the minority that people generally like to say, well, they're the ones getting mistreated, he was lying. And so this stemmed from the media outlet took this and said that, okay, they were yelling, "Build the wall," racial slurs. Okay, this kid's a white supremacist trying to hurt him. Did you see, like in any part of the video, these kids were yelling a school chant, is at least what they said. And in the video, it's actually not very clear what they're yelling. So again, benefit of the doubt, they were yelling a school chant. Benefit of the doubt, the guy was going in there to defuse the situation between the black Israelites that were yelling racial slurs. So, if we want to just take the original narrative, which is very different from what I just said, because that's, the real narrative that you can see in the story. If we want to take the original narrative that the guy was being yelled racial slurs at, the kid got doxxed because he was a white supremacist and, all these different allegations, and it simply was not dived into. It was taken at surface value, and, to do that, you really just have to assume, well, the Indian guy said it, so it must be true. To kind of hit off of that point, use that as a springboard, that very same mentality is used to rationalize this idea that there is systematic racism in the U.S. Because if you look at the facts, that's simply not true. And to start our story, we do have to go a little bit farther back. We have to go back to the 1960s, actually, with Lyndon B. Johnson. For those of you that are unaware, Lyndon B. Johnson started what is now called the War on Poverty. The War on Poverty was, a larger program that was just meant to help people rise up. That is funny, and you'll see that in a second, because it did not help people rise up. It actually hurt them. So the War on Poverty, affected all the people that were in poverty, obviously. that they, and at the time in the 1960s, if you remember, this was something was going on, a small little movement called the Civil Rights Movement with, Martin Luther King Jr., someone you might have heard of. But to say, so at the time, there was racism, okay? I don't think that anyone here, on our channel or that would argue that there isn't racism in the United States, at least not the main, kind of centralized view that a lot of us hold, is that there wasn't racism back then. Because there was. There was segregation. You have evidence of racism. This isn't just assuming the worst of people. This is assuming the absolute best. That, saying that someone can't come in because of their race, that's racist. Okay? That's racist. You can assume whatever you want. That's just racist to have laws and rules like that in your business. That's despicable and racist. To move on, though, that meant that a lot of people were in poverty, and especially the black community, and you see that they had about twice the unemployment as white people. If we're just going back. And so when Lyndon B. Johnson proposed his war on poverty and kind of sent out this idea that, we need to start giving people money and providing, different, that it mattered what kind of family you had and what situation you were in determined how much money you would get from the government. This is not a new idea. This is still being applied today. So, we see this idea, and at the time it affected mostly black people. It did. Because of the circumstances, it did. Now, this was 60 years ago. This does not mean that just because the start of it was because of racism doesn't mean that it's because of racism today. It's because of Lyndon B. Johnson's policies, and I'll tell you why. Lyndon B. Johnson created incentives to have a bad situation to bring yourself out of poverty. How do you do that? He did that by destroying the black family. Okay? If you had a father in the home, you got less money. So what did they do? You see a higher rate of people having children out of wedlock. Terrible. Terrible if you want to succeed in the economy. Just awful. That's like one of the worst things that you can do. Second, the more kids that you had, the more money you get. You still see this today. All these rules are still the same today, by the way. This is not new. This is the same rules being applied today. And so when you see that, you see that if you have a large family with only one person in the house and you having all these kids out of wedlock to get the incentives provided by this program, that's not conducive to bringing yourself up out of your economic situation. So what we generally call white privilege and what is called racism is actually just a holdover from a bad law passed by Lyndon B. Johnson that kept people in poverty. And since it was done in the 1960s, and because of historic racism, not systemic, not modern racism, historic, there's a big difference. Historic racism determined that blacks were the people that were affected the greatest. And so you actually see today, if we're just looking at pure statistics today, about 27.4% of black families live in poverty. This is from stateofworkingamerica.org. But if you follow the logic trail without any assistance from the government or any incentives or any programs from the government, you should think about the same number of black children are born into these families. But that is just simply not true. If you actually look, there's about 45.8% of black children are born or live in poverty under the age of 6, or 6 or under. Excuse me, that was a little bit garbled. But the statistics still stand. So you see almost half of the black population being born into poverty from about, if we're just estimating up like I did with the half, we'll just say 30%. So 30% of black people live in poverty and 50% are born in. This also means that there's actually a large percentage of them moving out of poverty, if we're just going to be fair, but there's a large percentage being born in, and the people that have kids in poverty are not helping themselves move out of poverty. Because if you have a large family that needs supporting, and you're below the poverty line, That's very hard to get a job, to get all of these things that, we consider to just, help elevate yourself, especially when you're doing that out of wedlock. So, a lot of the problems that we see, again, as white privilege and, historic, systemic racism actually stem from economic scenarios. So I know that, unemployment is a big one that is referenced. If you're in poverty, you have a job that is very expendable. Because if you're in poverty, you're not being paid a lot, which means that your job is not worth a lot to your company. As singular. Doesn't mean if you band together, your job's not worth a ton, because, if everyone at Subway that made sandwiches banded together, Subway would be screwed. But if you are one person working at Subway, your job is a lot less important than, the manager or the CEO of Subway. So you're the first to go. So that is why we see unemployment, twice as much as white unemployment in the black community, is because of the economic standing that when you are in poverty, you are going to get worse jobs. Okay, that's not controversial, right? I mean, it probably is somewhere. But even so, if you are in poverty, the only jobs that are available to you are not good ones. And they're very expendable. If you have no marketable skills. If you chose to have a ton of children out of wedlock, and presumably didn't, if you are having a ton of children out of wedlock, your college isn't the first thing on your mind. You're thinking of yourself. You're thinking of your job. So, you create a lot of this sort of snowball effect that, because of incentives for a large family without a father, you're creating all these incentives, and it's hurting these families. Is this like, I don't know, if we're going to say systemic racism, I call this systemic racism. If we're just being fair. Honestly, it affects everyone in poverty, but I'd still call it systemic racism. If that's where you want to go. So this is systemic racism. That doesn't mean that people in America are racist. That honestly doesn't mean that Lyndon B. Johnson was racist. That just means his policy has affected black people disproportionately. Yeah, so, when we see that, it becomes a very different matter altogether. I will, in future videos, I will love to talk about individuals specifically, but this was an overarching video. Thank you. Please subscribe to our channel. If you like this video, we're going to put more out like it. Every single subscription helps. It gives us, a little bit of hope that someone out there is sensible and watching and ready to learn. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.